Hello everyone, and welcome to University College Cork Study of Religions Research Seminar. Today we have a book talk on the art of resistance in Islam, the performance of politics among Shia women in the Middle East and beyond, from Cambridge University Press, published this year. And I'm delighted to welcome Professor Yafa Shanneik, who is a visiting professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Lund in Sweden. She researches the dynamics and trajectories of gender in Islam within the context of contemporary diasporic and transnational Muslim women's spaces. Currently, she is working on a project which explores women's narratives of transnational marriage practices performed by Iraqi and Syrian women who have settled in Europe and other countries in the Middle East since the 1980s. The project focuses on the historical developments and contemporary understandings of family and gender relations. It particularly examines approaches of marriage practices among displaced Iraqi and Syrian Muslim women and foregrounds questions of identity, home, and belonging of women constituted through local, national, and transnational scales of migration experiences. She has published several articles on gender and Islam and migrant identities in Europe and their marriage practices, such as Displacement, Humanitarian Interventions and Gender Rights in the Middle East, Syrian Refugees in Jordan as a case study in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, and with Justin Jones, she has edited Reformulating Matrimony, Islamic Marriage and Divorce in the Contemporary UK and Europe in the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs, a special issue. And her monograph, which we will be discussing today, as I mentioned, The Art of Resistance in Islam. And as part of the book talk, Yafa will be speaking with Ingvild Flaskerud, who is a scholar of Islamic studies affiliated with the University of Oslo in Norway. She's trained as a historian of religion. She trained as a historian of religion at the University of Bergen in Norway and has specialized in ethnographic research into Twelver Shiism in Iran and Europe. Her research interests include gender, ritual as social and ethical practice, Twelver Shia migration to the West, and Muslim youth in the West. She has presented groundbreaking perspectives on Muslim visual and material culture in the monograph Visualizing Belief and Piety in Iranian Shiism in 2010, and the co-edited anthology Muslim Pilgrimage in Europe, published by Routledge in 2018. And this book throws new light on contemporary developments of Islam in Europe. Ingvild has also been the guest editor of a number of journal issues, the latest being Anthropology of the Middle East, published by Bergan in 2022, which explores religious rituals reflection of current social conditions in the Middle East. In addition to academic writing, Ingvild produced in 2003 an ethnographic film which offers rare glimpses into spaces of ritual performance controlled by Iranian Shia women. The film is called Standard Bearers of Hussein, Women Commemorating Karbala, which was in 2003, and it has been shown at festivals and conferences and is used as a teaching tool at about 40 universities. So we're delighted to welcome you both to our research seminar series, and we look forward to your talk about this book.
Thank you very much for having me, and welcome to everyone. I'm looking very much forward to this conversation with Yafa because we share an interest in the study of Twelver Shiism, as you can understand from this introduction. And also we share the interest into women, gender, ritual performance, and material culture. And in the monograph that we will talk about today, Yafa, you examine the performance of politics of resistance among Twelver Shia women who follow Ayatollah Shirazi, who died in 2001 and was based in Iraq. Your research is also based on many years of ethnographic observation of women's ritual performance in Dublin, in London, in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Dubai, over a very long time span, from 2009 to 2018. So it's almost 10 years. So it's an impressive body of data that you present and discuss in your study, and which is very interesting. And in my view, you offer a very original approach to research on women and resistance, because you theorize social agency through ethnographic examination of ritual performance and material culture. And ritual performance and material culture are not often considered as fields of political or social empowerment. And we will return to this shortly. But first, I want to hear a little bit more about your research methodology, because you mentioned in your monography that you showed up at Shia communities in Dublin in 2009, prepared for semi-structured interviews with 12 Shia women, and you wanted to discuss topics related to their migrant situation, such as discrimination and restrictions on religious expressions in the public space. But you discovered that the women had different challenges. And based on that, you changed your research questions, and perhaps also you changed a little bit your methodology. And I think that your study is a very good example of the possibilities afforded by ethnographic research to engage with what's going on the ground, so to speak, to explore issues that are not well known, at least not yet in the research literature, and shift the focus from a more preconceived deductive approach into a more inductive, grounded analysis takes some courage. It means venturing into unknown territory, both empirically and theoretically. So could you take us through some of the observations that made you change your direction, and some of the challenges you faced in that change of direction?
Thank you very much, Ingvild, and thank you very much, Jenny, for the lovely introduction as well, and thank you for the Study of Religions department at UCC also for having us. Welcome everyone in the participants online as well. Sorry, we had to move to a webinar, but you will be able to write your questions in the Q&A section. So I'm looking forward to your comments and questions later on as well. And I'm really delighted to be here today with Ingvild, one of the major, scholars of Shia Islam, and particularly discussing my book more thoroughly. And yeah, you're totally right, Ingvild. Because at that time in 2009, first of all, I was very young. I was one of these young researchers, very, enthusiastic going into the field and doing my homework, prepared, my semi-structured, questions, going through what the books actually say. Particularly at that time, I was also part of a larger project on Islam in Ireland, and I looked into different Muslim groups in Ireland, looking into Algerian and Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, Salafi-oriented Muslim communities, Sudanese communities, but also Iraqis. And when I went to the Iraqis, I had already finished my other groups, and thought, okay, I can just take the same sheet with me to the Iraqi group and raise similar questions. When I was, as you said, I was in Dublin and at the Shia Center there, and while sitting there and listening to the women talking before the actual session started, I just realized that actually what I have prepared and brought with me in form of questions, I can't just leave in my bag because they are just so irrelevant at the moment for the women that I met. because at that time, that was 2009, just, it was the peak of sectarian tensions in the Middle East. A lot of power dynamics have been changed, particularly since the toppling of Saddam Hussein 2003. We had a lot going on, and it was a very unstable situation in the Gulf. And women who I met in Dublin were physically in Ireland, but mentally they were actually with their relatives in the Gulf. And that was really interesting to see that they know they on a daily basis, they are following what's going on, among their peers and family members and friends back in Iraq or in other Arab countries. But still, they had a feeling of being disconnected from what's happening to them, particularly in regards to the security situation. I mean, they felt that they are sort of, they felt a little bit bad, so to speak, that they are living in a safe space, whereas their relatives are not. And they've been always worried that at night they will have that phone call where they will be then informed that, there has been an attack or there has been a bomb and relatives have been killed. So that constant worry that they had for their relatives back in the Gulf was impacting their daily life, day and night, and they wanted. I mean, they felt really a bit lost, and also they wanted to feel that they are part of the conflict. They are part of that struggle. They are part of the sectarian tensions in the Gulf, although they are in Europe. So how did they do that? That was exactly what I was interested in. How did women, or how do women of Shia background take part in sectarian tensions happening in the Gulf? So I was very much curious to see, and while I was in that particular Hassaniya, obviously the session then started, and then I was able to see how it is actually done. It is not necessarily done through a talk or a speech, but actually through performances, and that was something I was very curious to learn more about. And I think particularly within the people who are listening to this webinar, who are maybe young researchers, I think as a researcher, one needs to be flexible and also willing to go beyond one's comfort zone as well, figure out more unknown territory, as you also mentioned, and see, okay, I was prepared for some research questions, but I went into the field and saw that, oh, actually I need to generate new ones. And that curiosity then helped me to generate new research questions, and to also learn more about performativity and rituals and identity formations and aesthetics and sensory experiences, and all these were topics that popped up while I was in the field, not really prepared beforehand to any of these. But it was exciting, and it was super interesting, and I wanted to know more about it. And I was very lucky, actually, that I was given access to all these spaces in various cities in Ireland, but also moved to other European countries and to the Middle East as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear, and I can recognize myself very much in what you say. It's actually a very typical ethnographic experience. So I think maybe we should also prepare the students more for this, instead of just giving them a list of method tools. But one of the central conclusion that you then come up with is that This is about the performance of politics of resistance. And so women resist through their ritual performance. What they resist is, amongst other things, Shia-Sunni sectarian power dynamics in the Gulf, which, as you said, changed after the toppling of Saddam Hussein in 2003. But important is also they are challenging the patriarchal constraints within Shia communities, which privilege men. And to many readers, it may come as a surprise that established traditional ritual settings, which are gender organized, can become important arenas for women's empowerment, and that ritual performance can function as a form of political agency. But this is precisely what you argue. And you do that by discussing various forms of bodily performance, which you observe women carry out during the rituals related to the annual commemorations of the battle at Karbala. And I find it very stimulating the way you add new perspectives to theorizing agency through an analysis of these ritual performances. In particular, how you connect ritual performance to the mobilization of the individual. And you connect this mobilization of the individual to the development of responsibility, which you then associate with agency. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about how you have theoretically unpacked this. But first, I think we should just clarify what kind of responsibility do they take?
Yes, so so first of all, I think just for those listeners who aren't that familiar with Shia Islam, just very quickly, a very short glimpse of of Shia history. So the whole idea, or the whole the identity of Shiis, is based on the recalling of historical events that go back to the Prophet Muhammad, and after his death, the question was who will take control of Shia of the Muslim community, and obviously two groups then formed, and one who said no, it needs to be an elected person, and the others said no, it needs to be someone from within the family. Well, just to make it very short, what happened then was that there obviously in terms of wherever there's a question of power and who takes the biggest piece of the cake, there are always conflicts and battles as well. So when you hear Shia Islam, you always tend to hear the Battle of Karbala, and Karbala is in South Iraq, and in 680 there was a big fight between that time ruling Umayyad dynasty and people who wanted to resist that and make a revolution, if you want to call it. And that Battle of Karbala is the battle where the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad was believed to have been killed. His name is Imam Hussein, and Imam Hussein was with his supporters there, of men and women and children, and the majority of them male supporters, and Imam Hussein himself was killed during that battle. Leaving women and children behind, and who were then dragged from south of Iraq to Damascus, where the then ruling caliph was residing. And the whole Shia identity is based on that narrative. And Shia, since the death of Imam Hussein, have been commemorating the battle, commemorating the fallen men during that battle, and perform rituals for 10 days. So this is really important because that commemoration period serves, you know, as an identity markers for Shias, as a distinct, you know, identity markers for certain groups as well. You know, what to perform, how to perform, to what extent to perform, and so on. The commemoration performance rituals. They include the recalling of Shia history. It also includes self-hitting, self-flagellation, walking in hot coal. It's theatrical performances, poetry, and so on and so forth. Some of these practices have been traditionally preserved to men. And for centuries, this has been, you know, regarded as the norm. Yeah, there are practices that only men do and other practices that only women do. Until 2007, and the date 2007 is not really coincident. I mean, as I said, during this time, it was the time of very, you know, a lot of geopolitical changes in the Middle East after Saddam Hussein's fall in 2003. So a lot really changed in terms of power dynamics in the Middle East, in terms of sectarian dynamics as well. And what also changed is the understanding of how we should commemorate Imam Hussein and who should commemorate in what form. And here we come to women's roles. And this is where then my interest actually developed into looking into what role do women play in the commemoration period, and how do they navigate or position themselves within this context of commemoration practices. And it was really, really interesting to see that in 2007, the wife of one of the leading scholars, Ayatollah Mujtaba Husseini al-Shirazi, and here just a little, just one second. Here just, you know, an idea about the Shirazis, and this is where, you know, the book focuses on. I mean, the book does look into different groups of Shias, but I focus on Shirazis in particular because this is a particular group of women in London who actually said that women should be able to participate in all ritual practices. So those ritual practices which were for centuries, you know, preserved or reserved for men, and women were excluded from. Shirazi groups say no, actually the women should participate in. And having the younger brother of Muhammad al-Shirazi, the picture is on the slide, supporting women actually to participate in these certain practices was a plus point. Two practices that we are talking about here. One is called self-flagellation, tatbir, and the other one is walking in a hot coal. And as you can see here, both of these practices are very controversial and have always been practiced by men. But since 2007, an increasing number of women have claimed their right to participate in these practices. Why is that so important? Because you know, self-flagellation, you know, shedding blood for Imam Hussein is a symbolic act to actually articulate their willingness to die for the cause of Imam Hussein, the cause of, you know, of seeking equality and fighting injustices and so on and so forth. And for centuries, women have been, you know, they haven't been allowed to participate in these practices because they were regarded as, you know, rights of masculinities. But in 2007, this changed, and that was a very important change because because it actually sets different power dynamics within Shia communities, gender power dynamics, and the whole idea of women's participation in the private and public sphere, women's participation in political activism, social activism, and so on and so forth. And this is where I then started to look into existing theories on women resistance and agency, and see to what extent actually women's participation of such or in such ritual practices can be regarded as agentic. And this is exactly the argument of the book, that I actually argue that our understanding of political resistance and female political resistance and resistance movements, they need to change, in that we include aesthetic performances as well, and sensory experiences, and how these experiences are used in order to fulfill certain goals. So obviously I had a lot of discussions, and some thought that, you know, there is something wrong, but the thing is, and why is it so? I mean, when I was telling friends and colleagues about the what I saw, like here, for example, in that particular picture that you've seen on the slide, this is the female space of the self-flagellation, prepared for the self-flagellation practice. And obviously it is a closed private space only for women. And there is a ritual. Women need to take off their clothes and wear a white gown. The white gown is like a white shroud that we usually would, Muslims would cover their dead bodies in. So it's a symbolic expression of the willingness to die for Imam Hussein. And women started to participate in such rituals. And for those who haven't seen it, so sharp objects like swords or knives and are used in order to flagellate oneself. All the groups that I actually visited, whether in Europe or the Middle East, women do not flagellate usually themselves, but others flagellate them. So what you see here, for example, on that picture, you have three, and on the back you have three chairs. Women would then stand on these chairs, and others would line up for them to be flagellated. And they can then indicate where and to what to what extent the hit shall be on the head. Talking to colleagues and friends about that, I mean, I was very fascinated about it. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. They would all say, well, but how come is, as one could argue, I mean, this is self-inflicted pain practices, so how can one actually argue that self-inflicted pain practices are agentic practices? Yeah, so that is the question. Why would a woman use self-inflicted pain practices as an argument for her empowerment and agency and change? But it's what I argue in the book is that even if self-inflicted pain practices do not necessarily are not necessarily regarded as agentic practices within a universalist, progressive, and emancipatory conception of female resistance, women that I worked with or accompanied, they see it as such. For them, it is empowerment because they've been for centuries excluded from these practices. They weren't allowed, and now they have made the initiative to actually fight for the right to participate in such practices. They went back, and how they do it, and this is very important also to highlight, how they have done it. First, as I said, in 2007, they had the support of the religious scholar and his wife, coming into the community saying, yeah, you should actually participate in that practice. What they also did was they went back to Shia sources and reinterpret them anew in order to make a case for them that they should actually participate in that practice. And by doing so, obviously there were a lot of resistance within the Shia community, within the Shirazi community, because for generations they never participated, and now suddenly women come up with that idea. And in 2014, when I went to that Husseiniya, or the Shia center in London for the first time, there were hundreds of women participating. And also I met women coming from Norway and the Netherlands coming into the center in order to see it, because for them this was new territory. That was just so innovative, something that they have heard about, never saw, and never participated in. So they came to see it. And what they wanted to see is actually how women in London are doing it, so that they can take it with them to their own communities in other European countries and introduce them to their own communities. But what happened is also that the women's participation in these practices that originated from Europe actually also started to influence other communities outside of Europe, particularly in the Middle East. And this is something really, really interesting that I wanted to explore further. And this is why then I expanded my research from Europe going to the Middle East.
Yeah, thank you. It is. I have, of course, read the book, but I think it's interesting to hear you elaborate on it, because you add also these personal experiences that came from doing the work. So in a way, this the women's ritual actions are gender transgressive. Does it have any impact on other gender transgressive or gender dynamics in the communities? For example, when we move over to the issue of political resistance, or does it mobilize the women in other ways than only the more personal? Because I suppose this self-flagellation is also connected very much with their notions of piety and their communication with the divine. But if we move over as a political resistance, does it have any impact?
Yes, 100%. So what I'm trying in the book to do is actually to look at different forms of resistance through ritual, through the body, in form of self-inflicted pain practices, but also through speech in terms of sermons and poetry that are also part of the commemoration context, but also material and visual culture, looking into objects, theatrical performances, but also supernatural apparitions. And all these alternative expressions of resistance serve different aims, locally, nationally, and transnationally. They look into political authoritarianism. So when you look into the poetry recited, for example, you can see that there are links made between historical events and current political issues, particularly sectarian issues in the Gulf. So constantly there are links made between historical Shia figures and current political figures, for example, and also when you look into the theatrical performances as well, you have always this merge between the historical accounts and the contemporary political struggles. And one of the reasons why they are doing it, first, to make historical events relevant to today's time. It's always, particularly for younger people, always a struggle to make religion relevant for younger people, particularly those living in the West or in Europe in particular. But they also do it, as I said in the beginning, to link diasporic communities with communities in the Gulf as well, and allowing them to actually share the struggles that particularly Shias in the Gulf who live under Sunni authoritarian regimes, to have the feeling that they are supported by diasporic communities. They are not left alone, and that they are part of the ongoing conflicts and struggles. And this is where the transnational links with the communities in the Gulf is very important. And this is where the book actually contributes the most, looking into the local and the national, but also the transnational links of Shia communities who try to build a global Shiism, so to speak, a feeling of unity, expressed through different ways. And we have seen, I mean, one needs to also bear in mind that Shia communities are very diverse in terms of their religiosity and who they are, who they are following or emulating. But also in terms of their positionalities within the different countries. So we have seen, for example, Iraqi Shia communities in Europe, in London particularly, fighting for lobbying for political parties. We have 3 or 4 who became prime ministers and so on. So you have the Iraqi side looking into the transnational political engagement of Shia. But what I am also adding to that is the aesthetic engagement, sharing an aesthetic style, building a community of practice, a community of a sensorialized sociality, so to speak, where women in different parts of the world are fighting for political engagement, but also, as you said, religiosity transnationally. And here, particularly the group that I have been working with, they are very active in the online. They are netizens, as we call them, who would use the internet in order to mobilize other women to follow and to do same practices. Like here, for example, as I said, in order for you to self-flagellate, you need to wear a white shroud or gown, also across your forehead, and because women usually would be veiled, they cannot, as men would do, pose themselves in front of the camera and put that in the internet. They would, however, do is that they would take the shroud off, take a picture of the blood shed on it, and then put that in the internet. So again, here, women are trying to find spaces to navigate within their own religious framework in order to empower other women to do the same. Finally, I also would like to point to another act of resistance, so to speak, which is looking into women entering the public sphere through, writing banners, doing graffiti on the walls, which I have observed in Bahrain, for example. And again, here, before women would go to the public sphere, and participate in the ongoing political struggle, they would, in the private sphere, have engaged with sensory practices, applying self-inflicted pain practices, within their communities, being, within that sensory environment, and then going out on the public sphere. So your question, do they transform their gender empowerment outside of ritual practices? Yes, they do, by contributing to public debates and public activism on the streets, particularly in countries like in Bahrain.
Thank you. I don't know if there is time for me to bring up a last issue, or we should ask Jenny about the time. We want also to leave some space for questions. What do you say, Jenny?
I think there's time for
there is time.
You should bring up
yes.
another
okay.
one last issue. Yeah.
One more. We have seen in the last month also bodily resistance very much performed in Iran, women taking off their headscarves. So we see another example of this bodily performance and the mobilization of resistance. It's done on a very individual level, very personal level, taking something off your body, doing something with your body, but at the same time, it becomes a collective act, and it's also supported not just by women but by men as well. It would be interesting to hear if you have, Yafa, some reflections about how we can develop the study of resistance through the body and body performance.
Yes, I think it is really important to actually develop this further. Obviously, my work has been on women's participation, women's use of the body, but the use of the body as a weapon is not new. So we have a number. Obviously Foucault, was part of that discussion, and looking into, for example, prison and the use of methods such as self-starvation and so on as a form of protest is something that scholars have been researching for a number of years. Looking into, however, the aesthetics and the use of the female body within Muslim communities, this is something that is new and that needs to be investigated further, particularly looking at the visible but also the less visible forms of resistance that women particularly would perform on themselves. Yes, as you have mentioned examples, we have the visible acts of resistance on the street went viral and so on and so forth, but we also have much more less visible acts of resistance, like direct and indirect subversions of power that women try to achieve. And I think it is really important that we invest time in examining those. The challenge obviously is that one needs to get access to these spaces where these less visible, there's a reason why they are less visible, is because people wanted to stay limited and their access limited as well. But if researchers get access to these spaces, it is really interesting to see, and also to contextualize and use to strengthen and widen existing understanding of resistance and agency, particularly female agency, because at the moment we do have a certain understanding of progressive, liberal, emancipatory female resistance, and acts such as self-flagellation or general self-inflicted pain does not fit into that necessarily. And what I argue is actually, no, we need to maybe work on our own understanding of what we think agency and female resistance is, and what we understand as emancipatory in our own European world, but also see that actually there are different forms of resistance that we also need to pay attention to. And we kept seeing all these examples around the world where that particular claim is actually supported. Yes, there are different forms of resistance, and we need to pay equal attention to all these forms.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation very, very much, and the last thing you pointed out also resonates very much with my own observations in Iran, with women sticking to old style rituals, very conventional, but in a very sort of tacit resistance to the ideologization of rituals that the government wants to promote. So thank you very much, Yafa, and yeah, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much, Ingvild. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Yafa and Ingvild. We have the first question from Nada, who says, fascinating work and presentation. Did the various forms of ritual practices convey different forms of resistance? Did women see their actions as resistance?
Yes, definitely so. And but obviously they would not necessarily use terminologies that we would use, or scholars in academia would use. And we have seen this in, among other scholars who have questioned terms like feminism and so on, because a lot of them would reject even to use that word, and would reject actually being categorized as activists in the first place. But what they do see is that they are contributing to a new understanding of power relations within their communities, between men and women, but also in the public sphere, and presenting Shia Islam as, so to speak, the good Islam versus, Sunni Islam that is very much, related, around violence and so in marches, for example, of Shia around the world, but in London in particular, for example, you would at that time in 2014, you would see people on the street in these marches having banners of saying that no to ISIS, no to violence, and Shia is the answer, and so on and so forth. So yes, you do have obviously that inversion of power, so to speak. So yeah, they are very much aware that they are contributing to a new understanding of power relations, and they're very happy about it, but not all, obviously, as well, because you would find also a lot who would fight that development, and who would say, no, we actually should keep low-key as women, as Shia, and so on and so forth. So again, it is really important that one does not generalize, and within not even in among groups, but intra group relations as well. So even within the Shirazis, for example, you would also have people who say, we've never done self-flagellation before, why should we do it now? Others who would say, no, we haven't done it because we were suppressed, and now we need to do it because we have the knowledge, and we have the power, and we have the skills actually to fight for that right. So yeah, I think that they are very much aware of their empowered role, and they enjoy it, and they articulate it, and within the religious gatherings of women, whether in Europe or in the Middle East, you do find those who are leading these gatherings to actually support women and make them understand that, and they need to move, they need to change, they need to do something, they need to participate and support men, and then they go back to history and give examples of how actually women always supported men in their fight for justice.
So because this is in a webinar format, if there are more questions, you can type in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I just enabled it, Mustafa.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Yafa, for the fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it, and just very interesting thoughts coming across. I just want to wonder about the methodology. Sorry, to take back you to the methodological and analytical framework. This is a Foucauldian argument in which that you contend that the dominance within the Shiite Islam as practices, ritualistically speaking, or a religion in general, brings with it a sorts of resistance for women to maneuver their way into society and the restrictions of Shiism itself. In other, I'm trying to find the what I have in mind is Sabah Mahmoud's book, about how the dominance brings with it completely the opposite of resistance in an effective manner as such. This is part of what you argue for. So second question, and for the fascinating thought that you have, it seems to me that you have in mind the differentiation between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. I'm not quite sure if this is outside of the area that you're interested in, how far the differentiation between both versions would have impacted the positionality of women when it comes to resistance as such. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, all right, thank you very much, Mustafa. In terms of the first question, yes, obviously I build on Mahmoud's theories and others, Assad, Mahmoud, and Abu Lughd, and all these fantastic scholars. But I think what I did is, or tried to do, is actually to start where others have stopped and include the aestheticization of politics into the argument and the discussion, because I think that that is a territory that has not been explored before and not included in the discussion of women's emancipatory resistance activities, and this is something that I have been much interested in how the aesthetics on the female body is used as a tool for emancipation, and I hope that I made that clear in the talk, and I discuss it in more detail, obviously, in the book, where I look into the formation of a community of practice, a community that is based on sensory experiences. Recalling, for example, I mentioned apparitions. When Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad and the mother of Imam Hussein, appears in these ritual gatherings, she is perceived as a symbol of assurance that she is supportive towards these emancipatory developments within the communities. So these are tools and if you like ways that Shia women try to support their claim for more rights and support of their position, the new positionalities within their communities in particular, and within the Muslim community in more generally. I also look into how, for example, Sunni women would come to these gatherings where it is known that Fatima would appear, in order for them to see her or feel her or be part of that environment, and how for how communities actually work together in order to counter sectarian conflicts outside of these private spaces. So yeah, this is one in terms of Sunni Shia and how women position themselves. Obviously, that is very much so in countries where Shia are ruled by Sunni regimes, and here it's really interesting to see how they position themselves, particularly and there's a difference between Kuwait, for example, which is one of the countries that I looked at, and Bahrain. Because the Shia community in the historical, position of Shias in Kuwait is different than the ones in Bahrain, and the current political situation is also different. The role the regime plays in sectarian harmony is also different between these two countries, particularly after the Arab Spring, or during the Arab Spring in Bahrain. Bahrain was one, although not covered in the media that much, but also a lot actually happened there as well. And how women position themselves in the fight against sectarian conflicts in Bahrain, and what tools they use. I have a whole chapter on graffiti, and let me see if I have some pictures here. Unfortunately not, but how walls are painted by women at night, for example, and then later on in early morning the police forces will come and paint over them, and then they insist and paint graffiti on them again, and so on and so forth. So you can see layers and layers of graffiti, and then trying to paint over it, and then the graffiti again, and so on. And women take part of all this, and this is how they see their role actually within the political fight, particularly because a lot of these women, actually their male family members were either killed or in prison, or they don't know where they are. And they need to take care of their families, and they need to take care of the ongoing fight as well. So they are encouraged by their religious leaders, particularly female religious leaders, to actually take that role. And this is where they make these historical parallels as well, because as you remember, when I described the Battle of Karbala, the majority of men died during the battle. So women had to take over the role of men. And so these links are constantly made in order to actually authenticize the narrative of the communities, supporting women to participate more and more in the public sphere, and taking care of their families and of the community more generally.
Thanks, Yafa. So we have run over time, so I think we will wrap it up there. So thank you so much to you both. That was a very interesting discussion.
Sorry, Jenny, I lost the last part of what you said, but yeah, thank you very much, Jenny, for having us. Thank you very much, Ingvild, for your questions and insights, and for everyone who came tonight, and for your fascinating questions as well. Thanks a lot.